Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much.
Still buffering.
Lori's helping it. Not working, Lori.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are live.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of July 6, 2022. As always, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional ancestral territories of the Coast Salish peoples. And thank you all for coming an hour early today. We do have a closed meeting after this, so we will try to finish on time for those intending to go to the Island Agricultural Fair opening at 4 p.m. So with that, we'll turn to the first item on the agenda. Please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item would be approval of the agenda, and I understand that staff wish to pull item R4.
Okay, any other adjustments to the agenda? Okay, so I motion to approve that with the change. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is adoption of the minutes. The first item, M1, is the Special Electoral Area Services Committee meeting minutes of June 15th, and the recommendation before you is that they be adopted.
Okay, thank you. That's been moved. We have a seconder for that. Okay, thank you. Any discussion? These were the closed session minutes when we had our with Alan Nielsen. Okay, let's see, where are we at here? Lost my thread. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Next item, M2, are the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting minutes of June 15th, 2022, and the recommendation before you is that they be adopted.
Thank you. Do we have a mover? And second. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no business arising. Then we move to public input period. I have no virtual applicants. I'm not sure if there is one individual in the lobby. Did you wish to participate in public? No, there are no applicants for public input.
Okay, thank you. So then we move to the next item, please.
The next item is correspondence. Item C1 is a grant and aid request for Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay. And the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $843.75 be provided to the Cowichan Bay Improvement Association to support funding for a trash receptacle for tourists.
Thank you. That's been moved. Seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item C2 is a grant and aid request for Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay. Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay, in the amount of $500 be provided to Cowichan Bay Improvement Association to support the beautification of the village with some flower baskets.
Okay, that's been moved. Seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item, C3, is a grant and aid request, Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls. Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,500 be provided to the Lake Cowichan School for two 750 bursaries for two 2020 graduating students that reside in Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake. Did I not say 2022? Okay.
No.
To clarify, in the amount of $1,500 be provided to the Lake Cowichan School for two 750 bursaries for two 2022 graduating students that reside in Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, to support their future education or training.
Thank you. Moved. Seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next one, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is a grant and aid request for Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $8,000 be provided to the Coaxial Volunteer Fire Department to assist with provision of emergency service to West Cowichan.
West Cowichan Lake. Okay, thank you. Do we have a mover? Seconder? Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is a grant and aid request for Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls. Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $3,500 be provided to the Cowichan Lake and District Chamber of Commerce to support the provision of mobile tourism promotion for Area F.
Okay, thank you. That's been moved. Seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Sorry to make you keep doing all the work, Ms. Harrison, though. Next item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is a grant and aid request, Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls. Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,500 be provided to the Cowichan Lake and River Stewardship Society to support fundraising efforts to continue watershed stewardship activities.
That's been moved. And I see Director Morrison would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't move the item as read because the supporting documentation has the amount of $2,500, not $1,500. So I would like to move the exact same recommendation with the amount being $2,500.
Okay. Noted that change. So do we have a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded? Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on, Ms. Harrison.
Actually, could we get a motion to accept that as amended, please?
Okay. I have a motion to accept that as amended. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of that amendment? Opposed? Unopposed, motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is information. Item IN1 is the Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls Advisory Planning Commission minutes of June 21st, 2022, and they are for information.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure that this is an accurate reflection of the recommendation. I'm just scrolling through it very quickly here. There was a recommendation that came from the APC while I was still in attendance at the meeting, and it doesn't reflect their firm commitment to wanting that special study area included in the containment boundary. It just says the area FAPC suggests that this parcel be included. I don't think that wording is accurate, so I think I'd like to send this back to the APC for clarification on that specific point. So I would move that it be referred back to the APC for further clarification.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Director Nicholson? Okay, any discussion? Director Nicholson?
I actually had a couple of questions about it that maybe could be clarified in the minutes at the same time, if that's possible.
Okay, go ahead, please.
So I was wondering what a definition of an outdoor recreation park would include. And my other question was, they talk about the work on Area F local OCP will start early next year. And I am wondering if that includes the Satlam part of Area F or not. Because we had some discussion about a local area plan for Satlam. So I think that would be helpful to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. I see Ms. Cheroff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the committee's information, the minutes do come forward and they are verified or checked by the chair of the APC. If the committee does have questions for the APC, it is completely appropriate to make a referral motion to the APC to clarify specific points. So we would send them another referral on the specific points that are noted for clarification.
Okay, thank you. And Director Morrison, you're okay with those additional points? Okay. So moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll go to the next item then, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item are reports. Item R1 is a report from the Development Services Division regarding application number ALR 22C01 for 3370 Cobble Hill Road, PID 009643330 and PID 009463313. And the applicant, Dave Simmons, is in the lobby. Would you like me to admit them?
Yes, please.
They were in the lobby. Now they've disappeared.
Okay. Well, we'll check in. Maybe Ms. Davinia, did you have some remarks to make first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some. I just need to put the slide up here. Just bear with me. I've got 3 screens. So this is for an agricultural land reserve subdivision application for a proposed boundary adjustment that would reconfigure the 2 parcels to eliminate the landlocked parcel. Staff have identified that while this proposal does not meet the minimum parcel size of 30 hectares for the A1 zone, Section 6.11 of the zoning bylaw does apply. The parcels are, the points staff have made are that the parcels are adjoining, no additional parcels are being created, and the applicant has indicated on the plan that the 2 sheds that currently would not comply with setting setbacks will be relocated, and the 4th point staff have determined does not apply in this case. While the OCP policies generally do not support subdivision in the ALR, it's considered that the proposed boundary adjustment would not result in, again, creation of additional parcels. the proposed boundary adjustment would maintain the original parcel sizes, create access to a landlocked parcel, and then result in compliance with density provisions for the A1 zone. So therefore, staff have recommended the application be forwarded to the ALC without a recommendation, which is here. And there are alternatives on page 4. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for staff on that one? Mr. Beanie, if you could take your screen down, please, then I can see everyone.
Thank you.
There we go. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Simons is back in the back up there again. I would defer to him first, but I do have a couple of questions and a recommendation as well. But I'd defer to Mr. Simons first.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Simons, are you there? I don't see him.
I see him on my screen.
How about that?
There he is.
Oh, there we go.
Does
Welcome,
everybody hear
Mr.
me?
Simons.
It comes through all right?
Yeah, we can hear you fine now. We couldn't for a minute, but
Sorry for my late arrival. I was having technical difficulties in actually getting connected. So I caught the last bit of Jamie's presentation and whatnot. I think she just kind of outlaid what she'd sent out as the report. Yes, it is very much one of those things where it's two lots that were created a long time ago, before the agricultural land reserves were created, and they are of a smaller nature, just due to the time of when they were created. It does fall within a CVRD zone that does call for large parcels, but in that general area, most of the lots are or don't meet that zoning requirement for size. It is a landlocked parcel, so we are trying to create access to it now, but in doing so, just realigning the parcels between the two lots that are owned by the same owner. So what it also does is allows each dwelling to occupy its own lot. Currently, both dwellings are on one lot, and it just allows for better use of the land by each dwelling's occupier, and they are all family. So that's sort of the main gist of it. I'm not sure if Jamie got into the aspects of the road and other subdivision aspects that were done a long time ago, but it also will clean up some aspects with the road frontage and things like that. So
okay.
I'm not sure if that answers any questions or creates even more. So
Yeah, well, thank you for that overview. So we'll turn to committee for questions. I think Director Wilson has one.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would one question that I would have for staff, maybe, or maybe Mr. Simons. This option 1 is for forwarding to the ALC without recommendation, but option 2 has forwarding to the ALC with a recommendation. I would prefer, obviously, see a recommendation to accept the option 2 to go along, so that we can perhaps cut out one of the steps here, because as far as I can see here, there is no loss of ALR. It's a very simple boundary readjustment. So that, and one of the interesting sentences here: by adjusting the boundary of the existing parcels, she, Mrs. Jurgensen, is able to create 2 parcels with a dwelling to leave to her children. And here's the problem, because there is a shortage of land, there is a shortage of places where children can inherit their things. So I'm just wondering, maybe Mr. Simons or Ms. Gerolf could answer the question of whether forwarding this to the ALC with a recommendation would help to speed things up in getting a recommendation back from them or not.
Okay, it sounds like a staff question. Maybe Mr. Beanie, did you? Or Ms. Gerolf?
Well,
Mr. Chair, I defer to Planner Dabinia.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, to Director Wilson. So I'm not sure. Like if you mean by like a time, like time-wise, whether it will speed it up. But the board may, the board may offer a position recommendation, and the ALC is not obligated to approve it based on that position recommendation. But the support, is seen as positive, I guess. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Follow up, yes.
After the rest of the questions, I think in this particular case, if this is the right time to do it, like to put forward option 2, which is to be forwarded to the ALC with a recommendation for approval, so that we can ease the thing through the process it's going through.
Okay, you're moving that then, option 2. We have a seconder for that. Director Nicholson, you're seconding that? Okay, thank you. And Director Yanni DiNardo, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I just didn't feel that it was going to make any difference in the timeline. So I was just, that wouldn't be up to us anyway, but no problem.
Okay, Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, this feels like we're putting our nose into the business that we don't belong in. And, we have professional planners, and this is a very basic application. I don't feel comfortable stepping in and not allowing the process to unfold comfortably or properly, so that it's a fair process for everyone. This has been the standard that we've gone by, and I will not be supporting this resolution.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? Go ahead, Director Wilson.
Yeah, with all due respect to the director that's just spoken there, the staff have put in option 2. If they did not think that was necessary, then they would not have put in option 2. So I would like to go on with option 2, please.
Okay, thank you. I see Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm finding myself in that position as indicated just a moment ago, in which some of the factors that are being brought to bear on this are really beyond the scope of our consideration. I know that there were a number of properties around the Cowichan Lake area that had similar scenarios where people had owned properties for an awful long time and were coming to us asking us to help with estate planning issues and for for an ease of transferring assets to a next generation, and that really is beyond the scope of we're here for land use. And I'm a lot more comfortable with the staff recommendation of a no recommendation motion going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions before I call the question? Seeing none, so we have Director Wilson's motion on the floor. All in favor? Okay, I see 4. I include myself there, so that's 5. Okay, opposed? 4 opposed. Motion carries. Okay, thank you, and thank you to Mr. Simons for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is item R2, which is a report from Development Services Division regarding application number ALR 22D01, non-farm use application, Cowichan Bay Volunteer Fire Rescue, 4461 Trans-Canada Highway, PID 026301482, and the applicant, Owen David, is in the lobby. Would you like me to admit him?
Yes, please. Just waiting for the applicant to pop up there. Are you there, Mr. David?
He's in the room. His camera's just not on.
Okay.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there you are. There you are. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we'll turn first to Ms. Dabinia, and then we'll turn to the applicant for comments. Ms. Dabinia, do you have something to introduce us to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a staff report for information to the committee and board regarding the proposal for a new fire hall at the Cowichan Bay Volunteer Fire Rescue located at 4461 Trans-Canada Highway. The application was for a non-farm use. In staff's review, it was determined that the proposed use is permitted. It's under the civic use definition for the P3 zone, which includes public emergency response facilities, and the OCP designation for this lot is community institutional, which permits fire halls. So under Section 25 of the Agricultural Land Commission Act, a local government resolution is required for non-farm use applications, but that's where the application applies to land that's zoned for agricultural use, which this lot is not, and where an OCP or zoning bylaw amendment is required for that non-farm use, which is not the case here. So after consulting with ALC staff, and staff have determined that Section 25 does not apply and a local government resolution is not required. Therefore, a letter was sent confirming the compliance with zoning and the designation, and that is attached. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And well, okay, I'll turn to go ahead, Director Yanni DiNardo. If you have
I think if our applicant has something to say, I'll wait. If Mr. David has something to say.
Yeah, yes, please. Okay, Mr. David, would you like to add anything to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to reiterate that it's an existing use at the site. There have been 3 previous applications to the ALC that have all been granted. The first one for the original use on the site back in 1978. And then there was a consolidation of lots that occurred back in 2004, and then there was an expansion to one of the existing buildings that was approved back in 2011 by the ALC as well. The existing hall, perhaps the planner mentioned, we're in for development permit as well as a variance permit. The existing hall isn't seismically rated to the code today, nor is it compliant with the current WorkSafe BC nor NFPA firefighter regulations. So this is the reasons for the need for the replacement of the hall.
Okay, thank you. So, Director Yanni DiNardo.
Yeah, I just think it's maybe important for the committee to hear. I think there has been some emails to me about the AAP for this fire hall. I'm really happy to see that they purchased this land quite a few years ago. So, and the current fire hall now is almost on the road. So it is really valuable, and I'm happy to see this, and hopefully it will move ahead in the proper order. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So any further comments or questions? No? Okay, well, this one is for information, so thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mr. David, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move to the next item. Please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is R3, which is a report from the Community Planning Division regarding application number RZ20A01 for PID 001487141 and PID 030162785, PID 029304466, PID 003290751, PID 007058454, PID 028938755, and PID 012570644.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So this is the Brentwood College application that we have seen before, and it looks like Ms. Dixon is going to review it for us.
Yeah, if you would like that. Just to remind everybody, of course, we have seen this application a couple times now, but it, I guess most recently on May 4th, it came to the EASC. a resolution was passed at the May 11th board meeting that the application be referred back to the Advisory Planning Commission. It did go to the APC June 2nd, and now we are back to the EASC. So just as a reminder, my slides will change. Here we go. The subject properties are located off Lodgepole Road and Partridge Road, as we know, just south of the Mill Bay Center. The properties are owned by Brentwood School and are currently used for staff housing, and those are the properties that are to the east that are used for staff parking. Of course, the properties to the west is the property that is proposed for the childcare facility. The existing zoning is R3, Village Residential, and the OCP has designated the properties as residential. So these are the proposed plans for the childcare facility. They should look familiar to you. There are approximately spaces for 44 children in this facility, and the plans include an activity space, washroom facilities, kitchen, storage, and outdoor areas. And the access to the properties would be located off Lodgepole Road with parking spaces on the adjacent property, which they also own. So this application also seeks to rezone the properties to the east, as I said, of the TCH. The proposed plans for these properties are to consolidate those properties owned by the school and to rezone to P2A, which is a private school institutional zone and allows for a number of institutional type uses, including a childcare facility, indoor and outdoor recreation facilities. So these are some plans that were drawn up by the applicants and plans that the APC did see at the June 2nd meeting. They are renderings of what the site could look like with the play field as well as the higher density dwelling units for staff accommodation. Another plan here just showing the cross section and what it could look like. Adjacent to the other single-family dwellings, which is the property, I believe right adjacent to it is not owned by the school, but the one after that is, but the applicants could speak to that as well. So the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a traffic impact study, environmental report, detailed site development plans be provided, and a public information meeting be held before the consideration of an amendment by law. And the applicants are in the room to speak to the application.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dixon. So this should be fairly familiar to everyone. I don't know if the applicants would like to add anything that we haven't heard before. If we have them available. Mr. Shadlock, hello.
Hello, thank you everyone for allowing us to be here again today. Yeah, just a couple of comments. So in reviewing the HOCP, the #1 policy directive is affordable family housing. In 2020, we were lucky enough to receive a grant, some grant money for a childcare facility. In 2022, our organization, as a major employer in the South Cowichan Valley, is struggling to find staff due to a housing shortage. This past year, we have not had any mothers or fathers not be able to return to work due to a lack of childcare, but we have had a number of staff not able to find accommodation suitable for their family needs, and therefore left our organization or turned down job offers by our organization. Today, I stand before you echoing that our #1 need moving forward is the same as the #1 in the HOCP, which is affordable staff housing. One of the APC recommendations is to consider multifamily zone. This does not work for our operations for specific reasons. First, we have a provisional agreement with the Ministry of Children and Family Development to receive funding for a daycare. A prerequisite for this funding is to be zoned for intended use. And since the daycare we are proposing is larger than the exemptions provided in the Community Care and Assisted Living Act, our P2A zoning is required and enables us to be consistent with our school operations and secure the funding required to deliver much needed childcare. Secondly, we are in dire need to build staff housing for our ongoing operations. Part of this staff housing may be to temporary staff members or students of staff members, which may require us to tie lease terms to enrollment or specific dates. With the changes to the Residential Tenancy Act in 2020, we are unable to do this. Under Sections 2 and 3.1 of the Residential Tenancy Regulations, our school as a public body would be exempt from these provisions of the Residential Tenancy Act, but the property where the housing is must be zoned as school institutional in order to qualify us as a public body and secure an exemption from the province. The properties we have are dedicated to the current and future operations of Brentwood College. The question through this process is whether we are in compliance with the official community plan, and a clear objective under 2.5.1.2 is to provide institutional uses such as schools, recreation, and community service uses, which Brentwood has been a long-standing partner in service delivery to the region and Mill Bay. Any uncertainty around this rezoning can be mitigated through existing established form and character development permit processes down the road. We understand through previous meetings with the APC that there may be a desire to provide direction to zone portion of the land for the childcare facility now and hold back the approval for zoning of the staff housing lands. To be clear, we can solve our childcare facility needs for our staff today within our existing zoning, within our existing buildings. This is a community amenity that we're proposing that will help many in the community. Staff's report and many points within the HOCP clearly articulate the desire for medium to high density housing and employment areas within Mill Bay. We also struggle with approving one portion of contiguous lands for the Child Care Centre without a traffic study. One could argue that the need to protect the children is greater than those who would walk to and from work from the staff housing. Why now are we hearing about a traffic study? How does half of a parcel of land require an environmental impact study and the other half does not? Why are we hearing about this now? Why does a child care center not need public information meeting, but a housing proposal echoing the needs of the HOCP does? After meeting with Shelley Cook, Executive Director of the Cowichan Housing Association, and her positive support for this project, who notably 2 properties over is looking at a higher density senior housing unit center, we would ask that the CVRD continue to be a partner with Brentwood to help us begin on the path of resolving our housing shortage and to understand we have specific needs that our existing P2A zoning allows us to utilize for our operations. We hope you will consider staff's option 2 and recommend to the CVRD board that staff be directed to prepare a zoning amendment to P2A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shadlock. Are there any questions for Mr. Shadlock before we turn to general discussion? Seeing none, okay, thank you. So I'll just briefly say that I'm the area director for the area as well as the chair, so maybe a little tricky, but I do have a recommendation that I put together with staff to try to chart a way forward for this. In this case, I know we're all quite, we should be fairly familiar with it. It's certainly been to the APC 3 times now. It's fairly unprecedented. So we've had the same answer every time, and basically it's that denying the overall plan, but in favor of the child care plan. So perhaps, and I also know there's a deadline for the funding for the child care. Perhaps at this point, before we turn to question, if I could have Ms. Harrison read that recommendation, and if I can get a seconder, then we can move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a traffic impact, no. Oh, okay.
The one I emailed.
Okay. That it be recommended to the board that staff be directed to draft bylaw amendments to permit childcare facilities on lands between Lodgepole Road and the Trans-Canada Highway, PID 030162785 and PID 028938755. And number 2, that the applicant for RZ 20A01 provide a traffic impact analysis, environmental report, and detailed site development plans, including public access to the waterfront, to the CVRD for the proposed rezoning of lands adjacent to Partridge Road. And number 3, that the applicant for RZ 20A01 hold a public information meeting prior to further consideration of rezoning of lands adjacent to Partridge Road.
Okay, thank you. So I am moving that, and if I get a seconder, there's a seconder, we can turn to discussion. And I think I had first Director Yanni DiNardo and then Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, growing up in Mill Bay, it seems like step by step it's turning in. Brentwood College is buying up most of Mill Bay. They have been, decent neighbors. I would say that they've been good neighbors, but I have a problem with, I just have the staff question. So P2A, it's currently residential. P2A, is that taxable or non-taxable? Like, is there no tax that's paid once this is transferred over?
Ms. Dixon, would you like to take that one, or?
I think actually maybe if Mr. Shadlock is comfortable enough, I think he might be able to answer that one better than I.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Shadlock.
Yes, thank you. No, the change in zoning would not impact the taxable portion of those lands. The way the school would potentially be exempt from tax, we would have to apply for that. And we put in commitment, are willing to put it in writing that we would not make that application. We're very content to pay taxes on those lands moving forward.
Thank you. And then also with the childcare, I know when we talked about Laketown Ranch and community amenity, with the Laketown Ranch, they were building a swimming pool, and I'm not sure if we added a covenant or something into their plan that said that the public could access a certain amount of that time in the swimming pool too. Can we do something like this as well for the childcare?
Okay, looks like Mr. Shadlock.
Thank you. Yeah, part of our application for the grant was that we had to make it available to the community and that we had to operate it, forgive me, but it was for 10 or 15 years. So we couldn't just get the zoning and the grant money and then close it down tomorrow. And there's some other stuff in there as well with regards to community involvement and affordable childcare if that's available. So there is a commitment within the grant, and we have to submit an annual report to make sure that we've done that.
Follow-up, Director.
Go ahead, one more follow-up, Director.
Yeah, sorry. I just wondered if a commitment for the grant, but I thought with Laketown Ranch that we actually had a percentage or a number or something, because you said there's space for 44. Is there a percentage or something that we can put in for this, for the public, for an amenity to the public?
Okay, Ms. Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if the board, the committee, acting as the board, desires for the college to make available a certain number of spaces to the community, that would be a request to the applicant to determine whether or not they believe that would be feasible in terms of their proposal. And it would be a request to enter into a restrictive covenant specifying that a certain number of spaces would be available to the general community. And that would be the only way to legally require it and to enforce that for the CVRD's interest.
Okay, so just to clarify then, so I assume if we did pass this recommendation, then when the bylaws are being drawn up, that type of request could be included? Would we need to specify now, or?
Mr. Chair, so it would be preferable for the committee to clearly state its desires at this point in time so that staff have clear direction when it comes to drafting the bylaws.
Okay, thank you. So maybe Director Yanni, I don't know if you're okay, I'll come back to you. I've got others on the list, Director Wilson and then Director Acton.
Is that me, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very, Mr. Shadlock has mentioned a very important aspect of this whole thing, of this application, and that's the housing for prospective staff, which is a huge problem. And I'm very, very encouraged to hear that CHA has been involved in discussions as well. One of the things that took place a couple of weeks ago was a business walk in this area here, in Area C. And the report that we've had on the feedback from all the businesses that we spoke to, and I'm going to read this: challenges and threats to business in Cobble Hill, but this is throughout the areas. This is not just Cobble Hill. Despite being positive about the state of business, respondents noted numerous challenges and threats in doing business. When asked what the top challenge businesses were facing, the most common response was with regards to staffing and labour. And this is something that Mr. Shadlock has brought up. Many respondents noted the lack of available and appropriately affordable housing in the area as exacerbating the labour shortage. 30 and 36% of the businesses which were polled. Mr. Shadlock has highlighted this as well. We heard from 4 separate businesses in this area that they have found suitable applicants, and once those applicants have looked around for places to actually live or even rent, there is none. So this is making the problem worse. They can get the staff, they can't find the housing. So I'm very, very pleased that that they're building places for staff, and basically to cope with some of the problems that we've noted on this business walk. Not much of a question there, but it is a comment which is very, very relevant to what Mr. Shadlock has brought out. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Director Acton, please. And then Director Morrison.
Thank you. My question, I guess, would be to the applicant. In your grant, is there you might have spoke about this last time, so sorry, forgive me, I don't know. A set amount of spaces that you have to supply? This 45, where did that come from?
So the 44 is based on the actual room sizes within. There's a standard per child, and I think it's 3 learning spaces that we have, and it's broken down. I can't remember exactly, 0 to 18 months or something, and then 18 months to 5 years or something. So I think we have 1 of the learning spaces for the younger group, and then 2 for the upper group or whatever. And again, speaking to that, sort of Brentwood College versus not. Currently, our staff are finding these spaces somehow in the community. If 19 staff members come back to this childcare facility, it's going to open up those in the community as well. So this is a net gain of 44 spaces within our community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that. You spoke about that last time.
Yeah.
I guess sorry, can I go ahead, Mr. Chair?
Follow up.
I would suspect, just like Shawnigan Lake School, your daycare would be, if you had 1 year 30 staff that needed spaces, then those 30 spaces, and then you would fill the rest. And so I would suspect what Director Yanni DiNardo's worry is that you don't bother to fill the rest. So is there some kind of, how can we ensure that it's going to be 45 spaces? Because even if you had staff who needed 45 spaces, then it would go to staff. I get that.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just, and any extra, it is an amenity to the community, and we do appreciate that for sure. Whether it's coming from somewhere else or not, it might prevent people from having to drive further or whatever. It could be more convenient or just more of a school atmosphere that they want.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just so that's why I asked, is there a set amount? So do you I guess as a business, does this need to run at that amount to be feasible, or how do we just ensure that that number stays?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So our grant is based on that 44, so it won't be less than that. To be clear, we're not interested in operating the center, so it won't be Brentwood College Daycare. We've applied for the grant, we have the land, we have set aside some amenity dollars to provide this community service. We plan to outsource the building to a childcare provider. we do admissions for our high school, which is our core business, we won't be in charge of the admissions. So there's still another component to this of what is the incentive to our staff? Do we supplement that? Do we negotiate with the childcare provider what that looks like? Arguably, they're going to run it, but what we don't want to be in is the business of childcare, right? So admissions will be a separate. And to be clear, because the amenity dollars that we've set aside for this have grown, if we're being asked to do things like traffic study, environmental studies, we'll take those amenity dollars, because we're going to outsource this anyways, and put them towards these other things that we've been asked for. Because our problem, like I say, we have what we need. This was a community amenity.
So final follow-up, Mr. Chair. So that does sound like the same model that I'm not positive, but that Shawnigan Lake School is using. And so I don't think we need to add any extra covenants, and I'll support Director Salmon's resolution today.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, the specific details aren't as much of a concern for me as to maybe a little bit about how we got here. My discomfort is around you know, a 9:21 a.m. Email that's got a new resolution. I was already out the door when that came in, and so I guess what I'm looking for is a certain amount of staff comfort, Mr. Shadlock's comfort with what's being recommended here, and I raise this because, you know, this feels exactly like what the provincial government is trying to nudge local governments away from, is the clunky way of us going about doing business. And I'm not sure if the applicant was aware that this was coming forward. Obviously, you've had some discussions with staff and our corporate officers. So I'd like to pose a question. Is everybody, that Ms. Dixon, Mr. Ulf, the applicant, is this a fairly well understood and accepted resolution that staff are encouraging this committee to consider?
Director Morrison, maybe I'll just jump in there first. I'm a little uncomfortable with, you know, this is a committee discussion, and we don't normally have the applicants participating fully in a committee discussion. So I'll just leave it there and maybe turn to Ms. Chirolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Dixon has put forward her professional recommendation, and that was what was included in the report. I had a discussion with the chair and Director Salmon yesterday in regards to how the project could be advanced prior to having to undertake studies or to conduct a public information meeting. And so what's being proposed is that the zoning essentially be split, and so that the zoning amendment bylaws be prepared addressing the daycare, the addition of daycare as a permitted use on the lands to allow that to happen, and that further consideration can continue to occur with respect to the proposed housing, which is consistent with the original staff recommendation. So there's the significant difference to the staff recommendation that was in the report is that portion of it is actually expedited, if that is clear.
Thank you, Ms. Chirolf. And maybe I'll just insert myself here as the director. And the idea, you know, I could say a lot about this, but what I've tried to do with this is to expedite the portion that I got the feedback from the community that was the most important. You know, the APC was consistent, and it was even the two different, really the turnover, we had two different APCs in effect. It's been going 2 years. And that consistently they were in favor of what was the original application, which was for the lodgepole, the daycare side only. And as soon as we got into some other bigger questions on the other side, on the Partridge Road, where there's 5 lots and plans are not complete yet, it was basically they weren't in favor. And that's the feedback I get from elsewhere in the community as well. And I think there's a bigger issue here with relations with private schools and the community, almost town and gown. And I know it's not just Brentwood, it's we have other private schools in Shawnigan, and we need to keep building that relationship and keep working to make sure that everyone's feeling connected and feeling that the private schools are part of the community and what they want to do can be accepted. So what I wanted to do today with my recommendation was just to, I know there's a deadline, or there was a deadline for the grant, and I wanted to see if we could move that forward so that would happen. The child care part would happen quicker. And then we continue the discussion. We're not saying no to the other part at all by any means. We're just saying we need further information in public meetings. And there's even there's one lot that's future development is not specified at all what it might be. All that can come in due course. So just to sort of sketch where we're at and what the community feeling is on this one. Thank you. Okay. Further, Director Yanni Donato.
I still would like to see, like we did at Laketown Ranch, a restricted covenant, because when the grant ends the 5 years or whatever, I would like to see that a certain portion remains to the public. So I'm just wanting to see that happen in this as well. So I would like to see a restricted covenant. I don't know if that would be a percentage or something of the 44 spaces. I don't know.
Okay. Well, maybe should we deal with this motion on the floor first, and would you like to introduce one after we're done, if that's your goal, or Ms. Charles, perhaps you have a suggestion?
Mr. Chair, that would be, I think that would be a logical course of action.
Okay. So further comments on the, before I call the question on the motion on the floor? Sorry, Mr. Setback, we're done with the applicant part. This is a committee discussion. Okay, I'd like to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Now, Director Yanni Donato.
I'd like to see a restricted covenant. I'm not sure if it would be percentage-wise on this as well, for a percentage for the public. I don't know if 10, 20% or something for public, so that makes it embedded in this application.
Okay, I'll go ahead, Director Acting.
Yeah, I don't know that this is necessary, because essentially it's going to be 44 seats or spaces, and kids are going to have priority if they are staff kids, and then it's the rest of the spaces are going to have to be filled because it's being run by a private provider, and that provider is going to be running it as a business. So, and we know that childcare is not like the most lucrative business. They're going to have to use every single space. And then, so then it will always be changing, and we wouldn't want to, you know, I think it's just going to have its natural, it could be half most times. And it likely is. Like, that's quite a young age for Brentwood to have, say, 20 kids that are under 5 years old. So, you know, I don't know that we need to do this, and we don't have enough details. We just don't know what kind of consequences it's going to have for the community, for everyone. So I don't think it's a good idea at this time to add any kind of covenant at the last minute. But I get the gist of it, and I think we'll have to trust that that's how it's going to play out, just because of how businesses are run. Thank you.
I see that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ms. Charles, did you have your hand up? Go ahead if you did.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. So I'm not sure if I was entirely clear before. So typically in a rezoning situation, when we work with applicants and we work toward registration of restrictive covenants, it's a voluntary process on the part of the applicant. And in this case, what you are proposing to do is to expedite the daycare portion, which is contrary to what the applicant is asking for. The applicant is asking for everything at this point in time. So if you were to push for a restrictive covenant related to the daycare zoning, you may be able to do the daycare zoning, but the applicant may or may not be willing to enter into the covenant, and that would really be up to the applicant in this case. So
Okay,
you have
thank
to
you.
weigh the benefit to the community of the daycare versus the benefit of the covenant, I suppose.
Okay, so follow-up Director Yanidaro, then I'll turn to Director Wilson.
Okay, thank you. So just to be clear, the restricted covenant with Laketown Ranch was voluntary by the developer that said it would be for the public use. So that's what made that covenant successful.
That is correct, but there are a number of other things that are tied to that particular rezoning, including a significant increase in the density of housing on that particular site. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't support this one either. And somebody, the director from Area B, just used the word trust. And that's something which we have to rely on. This is a good employer. And I think in this particular case, we can trust the word that they will, if at all possible, include what Director Yana Donato is asking for. So in this particular case, I don't like the idea of a restrictive covenant at all.
Okay, so Director Yanidaro to close.
Yeah, well, trust is a good word, but I understand from another director that there was a climbing wall that was supposed to be accessible to the public, and it no longer is accessible to the public. So, you know, there needs to be amenities to the current residents that are there. There has to be things for them as well. So, I'm only looking at it in that light and listening to other directors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think there wasn't a motion seconded on that. So we are ready to move on. Are people wanting a 10-minute break at this point? It's 1:30? Okay. Back at 1:32, please, or 1:40. To do that dance thing again, Lori.
Still buffering, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Oh, we are now live.
Great, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So we will turn to the next item on the agenda, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item would have been R4, but that was pulled at the adoption of the agenda. Following that, we have item R5, which is a report from the Water Management Division regarding Sentinel Ridge Sewer System inclusion requests. And there is a recommendation before you. Would you like me to read that?
Yes, please.
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board, number one, that the certificate of sufficiency confirming that a sufficient petition requesting inclusion into the Sentinel Ridge Sewer Service area for the following properties: A, PID 005-793-777, B, PID 027684393 be received. Number 2, that CVRD bylaw number 2790, Sentinel Ridge Sewer System Establishment bylaw, be amended to include the following 2 properties, PID 005793777 and PID 027684393. And number 3, that the amendment bylaw be forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings and following payment of capacity fees, adoption.
Okay, thank you. And I see Miss Vanessa Thompson is with us.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add, Vanessa?
Yeah, so this is a inclusion request for 2 properties for Sentinel Ridge Sewer System. The first is a individual residential property on Bay Road with an existing home that would like to retire their failing septic system. And the second property is the Brentwood College main campus. They have a current building project on the campus, and as part of that, they needed to either reconfigure their on-site collection system or find another solution. So Brentwood College is a potential partner for the Mill Bay Wastewater Integration Project, and their ultimate goal is to join the Mill Bay sewer system that's to be established. So in the interim, they would like to proceed with their ultimate connection for the property to the Handy Road pump station. That's currently going to Sentinel Ridge sewer treatment plant, but with the construction of the Handy Road force main across the highway, which is expected to proceed probably late this year, early next year, and once the Mill Bay sewer system is established. So it's an interim solution for them.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Thompson? Oh, seeing none, would someone like to move? Is that you moving it, Lori? Yes, okay, moved. Seconder? Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Go to the next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is R6. This is a report from the Water Management Division regarding Cowichan Bay Sewer Servicing Agreement with Cowichan Tribes. There is a recommendation. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a 38-year sewer servicing agreement with the Cowichan Tribes beginning April 15th, 2022 for servicing of Cowichan Tribes lands be approved.
Okay, thank you. That's been moved. Seconded. Any discussion? Ms. Thompson, did you want to comment on that?
I don't have any comments, but I can answer questions.
Okay, any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And the next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is R7. It's a report from the Community Planning Division regarding City of Duncan referral of draft official community plan. There is a recommendation. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the City of Duncan be informed that the CVRD board supports the draft plan in principle and provides feedback as outlined in the Community Planning Division's June 23rd, 2022 staff report.
Thank you. I see Ms. Dixon is there if we have questions. Okay, it's been moved. We have a seconder. Seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Director Nicholson.
Maybe just a comment. I think on something like this, it would have been very helpful to have had Duncan staff come and provide a presentation on their draft OCP. I think it's a lot to wade through in 3 days when we have other agenda items, and at least for Electoral Area E, we're very close to Duncan, and it was difficult for me to understand how consistent it is with the way we're going with our modernization, and whether there would be any particular issues that Area E might be experiencing as a result of the OCP.
Thank you. And I'll just add, I thought it was interesting to see the multi-use path possibility along the Trans-Canada Highway through Duncan. I don't no idea how possible that is, but it was interesting to see. So thank you for your work, Ms. Dixon. So any further comments? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And the next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is R8. It's a report from the Inspections and Enforcement Division regarding enforcement of accessory dwelling units. There is a recommendation before you. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
Recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the accessory dwelling unit bylaw enforcement policy attached to the Inspections and Enforcement Division's July 6, 2022 staff report be approved.
Okay, thank you. That's been moved. And I see, maybe we'll get a seconder before we hear from Mr. McDonald. Seconded, okay. Welcome, Mr. McDonald.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no presentation. Before you is a report and attached policy for the enforcement of accessory dwelling units. The policy addresses issues such as investigations and inspections, enforcement and compliance, billing for CDRD services, use of Section 57 notice on title, and decommissioning of suites. Also in this, it contains a defined term that's non-compliant accessory dwelling unit. And what that is an accessory dwelling unit that was constructed without a building permit and required inspections prior to the effective date of the policy, what complies with all other applicable zoning regulations. So inspectors would check for life safety issues and if satisfied, recommend a Section 57 notation against title in that case. Staff would also recommend to the owners that use of this option is a last resort and recognizing the suite as a compliant accessory dwelling unit through the permitting process. The other thing in the policy is that it addresses billing for non-compliant suites. Another thing to note too would be that this policy is very similar to the one that North Cowichan adopted, and I believe they adopted it in December of 2021. And there's a recommendation in front of you, and I'm here for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Director Smith.
Thank you. Through the chair to staff, one of the things that I find is that people are very confused between an accessory dwelling and a secondary suite and garden homes and some of these other terms. I know that you've tried to fit it all together under accessory dwellings, but I think that it's still confusing for quite a few of the public. And so I don't know if there needs to be more definition someplace on that. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Okay, Mr. McDonald.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think that was tried to be encapsulated under accessory dwelling. I think that's the direction, and I see Ms. Breen is online, but the direction that we're heading with OCP and harmonizing of all the bylaws. So it's really just trying to look forward to what we would call any of these kind of suites, so they're not a bunch of different names. And yes, over the years it has been very confusing.
Okay, Director Smith. Follow up.
Just a brief follow-up. So if not all the areas go with accessory dwellings and they stay with the smaller footprint of a secondary suite, then does that mean that they're drawn along into the having to take on the accessory dwellings?
Mr. McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I understand the question correctly, I think where you're heading for this, I think you're looking at the definitions. The definition of the policy is going to encapsulate any kind of suite. And it's really looking at the targeting the illegal suites. So regardless whether it's inside the dwelling or as an accessory building, so it will capture them all.
Okay, I think I saw Mr. Tippett pop up there. I don't know if you want to add anything or.
Hello, Mr. Chair and committee. I'm sorry for the background noise. I'm at a planning conference in Whistler right now. I think to try and answer Director Smith's question, no, when the new zoning bylaw is developed, we're going to pay special attention to the terminology used regarding additional residences on parcels, try and develop a standardized wording that intuitively makes sense and is universally used throughout the region, but that would not go so far as to impose what we now call accessory dwelling units, freestanding ones in Solitaire, which is a community that right now doesn't permit that. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I have Directors Morrison, Martman, and Acton. Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. Through you to staff, and I read through this on the weekend and just refamiliarizing myself with it, and I think that this policy is intertwined with some of the issues that we're dealing with around the very short-term rental, the Airbnb type of rentals, and I just wanted to share what I'm seeing more and more of in our community is like I'm all for bed and breakfasts and that kind of operation, and obviously we've looked at another type of spot zoning recently, but it's the people that are buying a property with really no intention of living in it, but are either doing a commercial operation through Airbnb where it's rented out in that format year round, or they're providing additional accommodation units, not necessarily a full suite that you would expect in a long-term rental, which I think this is targeting to some extent, but the short-term rentals. So was there a view as to the short-term rental enforcement in this document? Was there consideration of that? Because as I said, I'm starting to see homes that have been sold that have potential suite accommodation or could be for families, but are just being taken completely out of that market and are going into the short-term rental market, the Airbnb market. Any
Mr.
thoughts?
Through you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question, and the short-term rentals was not considered in this policy. This policy is more for the suites and long-term rental suites. So no, at this point, it's not meant to address, say, Airbnb and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Director Martman?
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in this report and how it may help the CVRD deal with these units. I'm also interested in a statement, though, in it that talks about the date of construction. And how do you go about determining that? Because it seems to me that a lot of that seems to pivot off of that.
McDonald?
I see Ms. Rolfe has come up. I'm not sure if she wants to interject first or I can answer that question.
She's saying you.
The idea behind having in the policy with the date, it's something to discourage that in the future, but to try and help some existing suites that have been created. And the same thing was done in North Cowichan, and I thought it was a very good idea that we would look at the life safety, and then it would be looking at recommending a Section 57 notice on title. And that's not something that the owner is going to find desirable, because there are consequences to putting a Section 57 on title. It can affect mortgages and things like that. So it is kind of a last resort, but it's something we looked at that how do we address where it was zoned that you could have a suite, but they built it without permits. We didn't get to see what was behind the walls, so we wanted to come up with a solution that we could say look at and allow that suite to continue, but under having something on title, so some bit of not a penalty, but just something that would make the future buyers aware that there's something has happened.
Okay, follow up.
Yeah, just and I think the other part was about the part of it is around determining date of construction, and I wondered how you did that as CVRD inspections. How did you know that this was built in October of 2022 this year or October of 2020? You know, how do you do that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, a very good question. We will put the onus on the whoever the applicant or whoever we're going after to prove to us that it was built prior to that. So maybe they can show us receipts or something else. That we would look for evidence that it was built prior.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Joe, did you want to say anything, or are you just?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I just wanted to respond to Director Morrison's questions around enforcement of short-term vacation rentals, and that to clarify, those would continue to fall under the guise of the regular bylaw enforcement policy, or the current bylaw enforcement policy, which, you know, obviously may be amended by the board subsequently, but and that is those issues are dealt with on a complaint basis and investigated accordingly by the bylaw enforcement officers. And further to that, there are future opportunities to address the tenure of accessory dwellings either through the zoning bylaws or through the imposition of covenants or housing agreements through rezoning processes.
Okay, I'll give you a follow-up then, Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I'm just curious. I know that the welcome to the Cowichan Valley letter that we were doing for a while there has been on a bit of a hiatus for a period of time. But I think our former CAO had indicated that there was some desire to restart that and make sure that new owners in our area were aware of some of the key aspects of being an owner in this area. And I'm just wondering if Mr. Elf has heard any progress on that front as to whether senior management team has looked at that, and whether or not some of these things that we're dealing with, for instance, the subject of this report and the fact that Airbnbs generally aren't allowed in most of the regional district, whether or not that might be some of the content of a future letter that may be developed.
Mr. Elf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff would have to report back to committee on that particular topic.
Okay, thank you. So I have Director Acton and then Nicholson.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering mostly, how does this empower bylaw more to be able to, like, I know that there was some wording in there like judgment and everything, but you know, we don't want to go around evicting people, really. It's usually just a cranky neighbor has complained about someone else, or they get a complaint because there's too many cars being parked on the road, or so. I guess I just can't. I don't have a good understanding of like how this works on the ground. Could you explain that a bit, like how it's going to be used in a useful way, respectful way?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So to understand some of the aspects of this policy, one is to give staff the direction to follow a policy. The other thing with things like suites that like the billing process. So we need to get that into policy so that there was a policy that recognized that there may be an illegal suite. We know it's an illegal suite, but we can still fairly bill for it because it was unfair that maybe somebody's got the suite and they're not paying for their services. So that was one aspect, but also for the enforcement aspect was looking at things. There's language in there saying may take action. So we can take a complaint and it's up to, they can use discretion as to when and how to enforce. So there's not a lot of change on that front, but now it's in a policy. And the other thing that's in there is the decommissioning of suites. So it outlines what decommissioning looks like as well. So it's a bit clear to the public and to the enforcement officers what they'll be looking for.
Okay. Director Atkin, go ahead.
And I guess, like to this date, without this, are we causing people to get evicted essentially? Or, without that discretion, were we, adding to the issue of housing?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, this policy wasn't designed, and I understand that with the housing correct, so I didn't want it to be confused as that we're stepping up enforcement. It's just for enforcement. So there's no change to how aggressively we're going after suites, but it does, if there's complaints and there are illegal suites, so we will act on the complaint. So I can't get into specifics of person complaints, but from a general level, that's what it's intended for.
Okay, interesting, thank you. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I guess I'm just looking for some clarification here too. So my understanding when I read this is it's about trying to provide a bit of leeway for accessory buildings or accessory suites, whatever they are, in areas that are they're not compliant, but they're in areas that otherwise would allow that kind of density or zoning in the zoning, and so it's to try and provide some leeway for the fact that we need the housing. But in areas where we have these non-conforming or non-compliant accessory dwellings, where the zoning does not permit them, we will pursue that a little bit more aggressively, because that is indeed not in keeping with the community plan. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
It is correct, actually, because that's what ultimately what we're looking for is compliance. So it's basically set up that if the and that was what Director Martin was on about. He was talking about dates. Well, it really comes down to only two things. Once the policy is in place, really we're only looking at, is the suite compliant completely or is it not? So once that option's off the table, and once the policy comes into play, you're really looking at the non-compliant. So say the zoning didn't permit the density. Absolutely, that's the ones that we would go after and say, no, those must be decommissioned. And then we'd also be looking for ones that were allowable. They have to meet all the things for the BC building code. So you're either 100% compliant or you're just not allowed to have it.
So my follow-up is around some community concern about more around the tiny home issue and the on wheels, and then also people living in RVs, so putting pads in, and some of those would be the zoning would not allow it, the extra density, and so those should be pursued aggressively. And then the other issue is around the safety and not being allowed to live in trailers with wheels, kind of thing. Yeah, so I'm wondering if have we done anything about our website on the tiny homes on wheels issue? Because we talked about providing better information to the community on the problems around that.
Mr. McDonald? Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, I went from mute to mute. That's something that is, I think we're addressing that through our service review, and that is something that was one of the recommendations. So I'll be bringing a report shortly. I don't think if I can make the 20th or not, but at the following ESC meeting, I'll be bringing a report forward that will have some recommendations through that service review that will address information that we would get out to the public. So currently, the answer would straight have to be no, but it's on our radar.
Okay, we'll go ahead, follow up again, Director Nicholson.
This isn't a follow-up, it's just a comment. I have heard from the community that there are concerns about people who are living illegally in dwellings on property where there could potentially be some environmental risks associated with it, to the water table and drainage and so forth. So I'm not, this idea of complaint driven is a little bit challenging, I think, in some of our areas because there are lots of trees and the neighborhoods don't like to really snitch on one another. And yeah, but it is definitely an issue in some areas. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just insert myself before I go to Acton and Morrison, but I think it's a very important issue, and I really, maybe just echo Director Acton, I really would not like to see us evicting people unless absolutely necessary, and I know we don't want to, discretion is a good thing, maybe I'll just leave it at that, and unless there's some serious safety issues or such, that's my thinking. So Director Acton and then Morrison.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess my question is related to an item that we have further down on the agenda today, and it's the Kia Crescent application. I'm very familiar with that strata, you know, the houses, and so these are nice houses with some suites, and now they've got some illegal suites. So how would this new like how now we've described how we're going to operate, how will this affect those units? Can you comment on that?
To you, Mr. Chair, yes, I can comment on that. So my understanding, I think I'm familiar with that file, that the zoning currently doesn't permit suites where they have created those suites or are intending to have suites. So based on the policy, they would have to be decommissioned. That's part of the intent of this policy, is that where zoning doesn't permit it, that the suites don't start to appear.
So you couldn't use discretion in this case because these are, I think it's just a matter of like a point of a, you know, a tiny, like a meter or something of land that they're missing. And, you know, these are nice homes and they've provided information on their septic system, and it's even a strata. So it was people buying, it was built to have these suites. So people have bought into it. The strata allows these suites, and so I'm sorry, we're getting into the application, but is it not something that, because essentially now we're losing viable suites and to our housing crisis. Anyway.
Okay, see you, Ms. Charoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's really important not to conflate a bylaw enforcement policy with zoning. So all this policy is setting out is how the bylaw officers would proceed with a complaint of unlawful housing. It's not saying what the zoning is going to be or making an analysis of zoning in relation to the complaint. So the zoning issue is separate, and that needs to be addressed either through amendments to the applicable zoning bylaw or to the zoning for site-specific rezoning application. So you can separate them. But this policy is really intended to be the sort of the playbook for how the bylaw enforcement officers will deal with a complaint of unlawful housing. I hope that's clear, and I hope that was correct, Ian.
Okay, thank you. So we're on round 2 now. So
Can I just ask?
Okay,
so
go
in
ahead.
This case, there couldn't be so it dictates how so with this report that we have in front of us, it would, in that case, yeah, I guess I am confusing them. It's it's a challenge, but okay, I'll wait for that application to come up.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I can just add some of his points. So I kind of think I know where Director Acton's going with that. For bylaw and even building, we just look at the rules as rules. We don't look at, it's just an inch over, it's 2 inches over, it's 5 inches over. So I guess if that's what she was looking for, if it's not compliant and we get a complaint, then bylaw will investigate. So I think that answers your question. I'm not sure.
Okay, but you do have the choice to either enforce it or not enforce it, correct?
We also can go through committee and closed on certain instances to see whether there's a, the committee wants us to continue with enforcement.
Okay.
Okay, maybe just to clarify before, so you're saying with zoning issues, we don't have the same discussion that we do on other issues? Mr. McDonald.
Mr. Chair, no, what I'm really saying is that if there is a rule that's black and white, and that's what it says, if the zoning says no, then that's what we look at. Then we're going to look for compliance, so it does comply with the bylaw. We don't. There is no gray area for us. It's just either it complies or it doesn't.
Okay, thank you. So Director Morrison and then Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I'm getting clearer all the time, and what we have here is a policy, and a policy doesn't have the same gravitas as zoning. Zoning is clear, and that's what staff will follow, but it's very nice for them to have a policy that gives clarity when it isn't a strict zoning question. So I get that part. The one question that I want to bring in, and this is where Mr. McDonald had indicated that there will be some additional information coming later on Airbnbs or tiny homes, that sort of thing. I'm wondering if we maybe need to have a meeting or a discussion that brings the three things together, because quite frankly, yes, we can deal with this, but just through the discussion today, you've had the Airbnbs brought up, and you've also had tiny homes brought up. Is there an opportunity for us to have that discussion about, secondary dwelling units and suites and Airbnbs and the tiny homes? Because it's proliferating. All three aspects are proliferating. People are buying, and in the case that, I won't reference the one specifically, but when a developer creates a development and they do a strata and they're squeezing every inch out of land to get the maximum number of developable lots, it's with the intent that if it's just a little bit too small, that there's not going to be a suite there. So I think that these three issues coming together should be discussed, because I can just envision we're going to get roasted in the media and in our communities when we start to implement and enforce zoning and the policy. People are going to really question when they go in. The investments are so huge, and some people are buying properties on the basis of they're going to put a suite in as a mortgage helper, and it just may not be allowed. And staff will have to make some of those decisions and bring those decisions to us on enforcement. And we're just not, there's no good outcomes for us when people are making these kind of investments. So I turn to Mr. Ulf and the rest of the committee. Should we not be having a discussion of the issues in a broader context to see how they all fit together? Or is this just an issue going on in my area that we take these individually?
Mr. Ulf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think it's entirely appropriate for the committee to, have a special meeting to discuss a major policy issue, and it's certainly important in the context of modernizing your official community plan, and that should really be the basis for any sort of further, regulations that you put in place, or zoning regulations that you amend, or potentially later enforcement policies. And staff would be, very open to coordinating a workshop of that type with you. It would have to be a meeting, of course. But I would say, and I hope it's clear that, there is currently a bylaw enforcement policy. There is currently bylaw enforcement that is occurring in relation to accessory dwellings and secondary suites. So that has not changed. What this policy does is, as you said, Director Morrison, it provides guidance to our bylaw enforcement officers in terms of, and our building inspectors in respect of the steps that they can take when dealing with suites that may not be lawful. And in some cases, they may comply with zoning, but they don't comply with the building code. And so there's an avenue for placing a notice on title to allow those suites to continue, to allow those units to be occupied where there are not explicit health safety issues. So that is the clarification here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Director Nicholson, maybe to close. Director Nicholson.
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, great. Well, go ahead, Director Yanni Donato then.
Yeah, I think this is separate. This has been moved and seconded, correct?
Yes.
Then we should move ahead with this, and then I think I don't know if we want to make a recommendation, but after this, but I would like to talk about the Welcome to Community newsletter. Maybe if we want to request from staff to move that one along, I'm not sure, but I will wait for this.
Okay. Well, I'll call the question on this one then. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. So sorry, Director Yanni, I didn't follow totally. Is that related to this?
There was we were going to get back to our community newsletter, but also Mr. McDonald said that there's going to be another report later on coming to us anyway. But I just wondered if the community newsletter was in queue or there needed to be a resolution to sort of move that, because I think it's really important how many people that are moving into this community and are not familiar with any of that. So I didn't know that it was discontinued, but it was a real valuable, and I'm not sure how much staff time it would take either. So I just like to know if that needs a resolution, is a lot of work, could it be put off for another time, but I don't want to see it lost.
Okay, you're talking about the welcome letter? Yes, okay. Ms. Cheroff? And then,
for you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so I'm not familiar with the newsletter and whether that came through Land Use Services or if it was a corporate region-wide initiative, because there are issues related to general economic development, right? And so perhaps a further discussion should be had with the broader committee of the whole around the value of something like that, perhaps for the region as a whole, as opposed to electoral areas only. That's up to you folks.
okay, so I'm just wondering, in the interest of time, I do see Director Smith and Acting both have comments, but should we defer this one for a fuller discussion when we have some more time? See some nodding, hopefully, unless it was urgent. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so how do we do that then? How do we make sure this comes up again? Do you as a chair bring it up? Put it on the agenda?
Well, it's
or can we
Mr.
table it for next meeting? Would that ensure that it ends up for discussion?
Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can refer it to a specific date for electoral area services or for a future one, which gives you a little bit more leeway as to which meeting it lands on.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think Ms. Charles said that she was actually going to look into it. So maybe if we just knew what the status was, and I don't think this is a region-wide initiative. This is electoral area specific. So if we could just have staff report back on what they find out, then we can take the necessary steps afterwards.
Director Smith.
Thank you. This goes back to 2019, and I believe it was under the communication manager, and that the letters were ready to go. They just needed a little bit more fine tuning, and it's been dragging along for an awfully long time. So maybe Ms. Chernoff can check in with the communications department to see where they're at with this. Thank you.
Ms. Chernoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just received a note from our executive coordinator in that there was a letter that was being prepared through the former communications manager, And we'll have to see what happened with that, because obviously we've had staffing changes since then, and we need to figure out what's happened with that. We will report back.
Okay, so we'll report back. Everyone's okay with that then? We don't need a specific date? Okay, as soon as possible. How's that? Okay, thank you, everyone. Next item, please, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is item R9, which is a report from Community Planning Division regarding Shawnigan Lake Suites regulations, referred from the May 25th, 2022 board meeting. And there is a 5-part recommendation.
Okay, perhaps rather than reading that, Director Acton, did you have were you wanting to refer this?
Yes, I have another resolution, don't I? Sorry.
I think so.
But I was just noticing that Director Wilson and Director Kuhn are not in the meeting. Were we aware of that? Did we lose them? Okay. Okay. Sorry, I didn't have it ready.
No worries.
It did go out.
Yeah, it came in the email.
I had a conversation with Mr. Tippett, and I shared the resolution that he had come up with through his advice that the staff report on small and secondary suites at Shawnigan Lake be referred to the Electoral Area B Advisory Planning Commission for consideration, and that the staff report be revised following APC input.
Thank you. So that's been moved. Do we have a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion? Yeah. Okay.
I think we want to discuss it still.
Okay, you want to discuss it now? All right. I have Director Nicholson and Martman.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, or at least one question and one comment then. I'm wondering if this, how this factors into the Kia decision that we have to make later on, because I thought this was probably very relevant to that.
Ms. Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it is, I understand, difficult to talk about these things independently because they are somewhat intertwined. My understanding is that for the Kia Crescent application, there are 3 lots in consideration, and that this particular set of zoning bylaw amendments would address one of the 3, or would allow for legalization of one of the 3 lots in terms of being able to have one suite. 2 would be under the 0.2 hectare threshold because those lots have water service only, not community sewer. So my understanding is that this would preclude 2 of the units from, or two of the parcels from being able to have secondary suites. Having said that, the rezoning application should be considered independently. And I see that Mr. Tippett has popped up and will likely have further comments for you.
Go ahead, please, Mr. Tippett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yes, in my discussion on Monday with Director Acton, one of the topics of discussion was, is there a possibility that by discussing these particular recommendations and examining the issue in a bit more depth at the APC, that we might arrive at some deviation from the recommendation as presented? And my conclusion was yes. And one of the specific points we talked about was whether the 1 hectare minimum site area requirement in order to have a suite in unserviced areas was a bottom line issue. And so one of the things I discussed with Director Acton, and which if this is referred to APC, I would intend to pursue with Island Health, is that particular point. Is there a possibility that a regulation could be written saying, for example, that 0.8 hectares might be a sufficient area given the particular soil characteristics in that area, or in Electoral Area B generally? And factor that discussion into the APC discussion, and thereafter revise the report accordingly and bring it back to committee. I support the director's idea that it's a good idea to send it to the APC because the issues there are pretty complex, and there's a fair bit of history behind some of the regulations I was proposing to change. So I think it's probably a good idea to have that detailed community feedback. But in conclusion, what Ann Cheryl said is correct. As presently formulated, the recommendations would only legalize one of the 3 Kia Crescent properties, but it's possible, depending on what we hear from Island Health, and if we choose to make further amendments, that perhaps all 3 of them could be rendered legal. But we don't know that yet, so it is kind of premature. And I think for the time being, the other application, which is the sort of unfinished business that's next on the agenda, would have to be dealt with independently.
Okay. Director Nicholson?
Thank you. So my other comment is about the 30-meter setback from the natural boundary of the Coaxial River. And I think in general we have to be paying really close attention now to setbacks to riparian areas. And in the Coaxial watershed, there's just recently been a March 2022 study that's come out that recommends that it be 50 meters from the main stem of the Coaxial River. And so I think we should be trying to stay on top of the most current science and thinking about riparian protection, particularly in the Coaxial watershed, which is on life support at this point, although we're doing pretty well this summer with all the rain. So I would like that to be maybe looked into, and I can provide you with the reference material if that's helpful.
Mr. Tibbet?
Mr. Chair, I would be delighted to receive that from Director Nicholson, and I also wanted to add that this is a series of interim amendments for Area B only. We're obviously going to be looking at this issue region-wide when the new zoning is being crafted. So, but yes, please, by all means, send that to us, and that can factor into our advisory planning commission discussion if that's what the committee does today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to the next, Mr. Dennison, you're not wanting to speak on this?
Mr. Chairman, I'm here for any questions. I'm a co-author on the report, so if somebody had something to ask about servicing, then I would be your man.
Perfect. Okay. So now I've lost my. Who is next? I've lost Director Martman. Were you next? Head of Acton? Okay. Then Director Acton. Go ahead, Director Martman.
Thank you. And Mr. Dennison is actually one of the people I want to ask a question to, but I have 2 questions. The first one is I'm struggling with the process because I hear, I know we referred this back to staff because of the Kia Crescent question, but I'm not getting conclusive answers to that question because it's going to be referred, or the question, it's being likely referred to the APC if this passes. And so until I have conclusive information, I find it very difficult to weigh in and make a decision on any Kia Crescent because it actually initiated the whole process to review, and I don't have any evidence to support what that conclusion was. So that's and maybe to staff, that's my difficulty. Or do they have something that's conclusive that can help me in this process? But I'm not hearing that. So is this conclusive, or is this, to me, this is ongoing? Am I correct in that?
Mr. Chair, with your permission.
Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, as when this agenda was being put together, the report that forms part of the agenda, if it stood on its own, and I hadn't had the conversation with the director on Monday for Shawnigan Lake, in theory, the committee could have made a decision, perhaps followed up on that, and then had a complete picture of what's likely to be in the future for suite regulations in Shawnigan Lake, and make a decision on the Kia Crescent application that was informed by that. So I totally understand what Director Martman's saying here. I don't want to tell the committee what to do by any means in this case, but if this is referred to the APC, perhaps the unfinished business item is premature to make a final decision on at this point. If that's how the directors collectively feel, I understand that.
Okay, thank you.
And a follow-up, if I can.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for Mr. Dennison, because maybe the other directors know this answer, but I don't. And so the question is that when we get down to sizes of 0.4 hectares, 0.2 hectares, and and water systems get involved, and they're not on sewer, and I think I heard Mr. Tippett made reference to soil characteristics. Can you help me understand how small can you go when you're not dealing with, when you don't have a common sewer system and you're on septic?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a very good question, and I don't know that there's an absolute definitive answer. There are requirements under. I mean, one thing they would be subject to are the rules of Island Health, and Island Health have specific soil depth requirements as compared to lot size. So you have to meet those requirements anyway, and that's independent of us. So that would be one thing, and I think they go to a minimum size of about half an acre or so, or something about that. I'm not sure. It's in their regulation. You can look it up. The technology is, so there's different parts to it. So you can, if you have even a standard septic field, so a standard septic tank, which is a very simple sort of treatment system going to a standard field, if you have good soil and the water table or clay layers or till layers are at sufficient depth, much of the treatment occurs immediately in the first, half a meter. And generally, your microbiology is removed and there's a lot of treatment right away. So you don't really need a lot of space in that sense. There's another element though, and that is there's things called compounds of concern, which are accumulating in our wastewaters. So there's all kinds of drugs and various sorts of chemicals that people use. Some of them they oughtn't put down their drains, but they do anyway. And some of those are resistant to the natural removal processes and might, accumulate. So, and the science on that is very preliminary at this time. It's not well known. So, it's a little bit tricky. The other thing too, as noted in the report, is that there are also options for further treatment. It doesn't have to be just a septic tank. You can have, quite a bit more complexity and rigor in your treatment process too, to remove some of those things before they even get to your field. So it's kind of complicated. We do rely on Island Health for on-site systems, though, and we have to follow their rules. So presumably they're on top of all this, or there will be further advancements in their regulations coming.
Thank you. Okay. Can I just ask a question following up myself? So, Mr. Dennison, does Island Health, do they just rely, is it professional reliance with them and they just go with the professionals?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it is. They have registered on-site wastewater professionals that do that work, and then they merely, the expression is, file the discharge. So they fill the forms and things, provide a little site plan and that kind of stuff, report what they've done, and then they just go to the office and submit it. And it doesn't get reviewed by a health officer, it just goes into the file. So it is a professional reliance model, right, for sure.
It's up to the professional.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Director Acton?
Thank you. So I guess I think my question's kind of been answered, but I'm not sure. It's around the 0.2 hectare that we have. If this goes to the APC and everything, that actually might be changed as well. Is that correct? We could decide after your conversation with Island Health that it's a different number.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I think the number in question is actually the 1.0 hectare number, because that's the one that, actually that's one of the questions. I guess the other one is, you're right, the 0.2, I guess in respect of the two of the three properties that are subject of the unfinished business item. Yes, I'll engage with Island Health. In the event this is referred to APC on all of those plans, not all of the sort of site area requirement aspects, and we can discuss it thoroughly at APC or in committee, however it goes. I hope that we'll have a clearer answer by then of what the Island Health is willing to recommend in favor of, because we don't want to do something that's against their advice, really. But it's worth asking the question.
And last comment, I just want to thank the committee for entertaining, this topic. Shawnigan Lake is one of the close communities to Victoria, so we are feeling the pressure of being able to allow, residents to have suites and everything. And I think it's a really important, as we know, with a housing shortage. So to just wait for our modernization, I think, is not in the best interest of some of the community, so we can treat this as almost a test pilot and kind of, go through the motions. So I appreciate us having this discussion today, even though it is only for Shawnigan Lake.
Okay, well, thank you, Director Acting. So seeing no further questions, so it's been moved and seconded on the referral to the Area B APC. I'd like to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Great, thank you very much. So, Ms. Harrison, next item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is unfinished business, UB1, which is a report from the Development Services Division regarding application number RZ21B03 for 2628, 2633, and 2663 Kia Crescent, and this was referred from the May 25th, 2022 board meeting.
Director Acton.
Thank you. Based on our discussions today, and I hate to leave people kind of hanging and unsure of the outcome. I think it would be in everyone's best interest if we just table this until a later date, or I think there was actually a recommendation on there as well to send it to the APC, but perhaps we would even wait until the next report, or the report we were just discussing comes back. So I'd like to refer that, and then I also have a question.
Okay, thank you. So that's been seconded. Just to be clear, so you're referring, what did you?
The unfinished business item to a future meeting once we have the information from the, what's the title on the previous?
Right.
The Shawnigan Lake Suites regulations.
Right, okay. Okay, so future ESC meeting?
Yes.
Okay, and that was seconded by Director Nicholson. Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Very good.
So I also have a question,
Saracen.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if we can, if there's if we can discuss part of that application in closed.
Okay, you sure you want to do that, even though we've just referred it to a future, or?
Well, what about any bylaw enforcement? Should we? No?
No, I don't.
It doesn't affect the bylaw enforcement. It's not separate because this is zoning, and I don't.
Okay, I'm not sure. Maybe
No one's
missed
popping
it.
up, but my understanding was there was some bylaw enforcement that brought this here. So, okay.
I think we referred it now. And go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
To you, Mr. Chair, my suggestion would be if you did want to talk about this, that it would have to go to closed if we want to talk about something specific. So that would be my recommendation, would be, if through Ms. Harrison, if that's appropriate, is to go to closed.
Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Director Acton. This item was referred back to a future ASC when we received further information. We also have an item in the closed session under bylaw enforcement, and I believe that that would be an appropriate time to bring up the issue of bylaw enforcement in relation to this item, not specifically, but generally.
Okay. Director Acton's fine with that? Very good. So, Ms. Harrison, what's next? Director Morrison.
Thank you, and I don't know if I'm misspeaking here, but it's been my understanding for a lot of years that when we have an active enforcement action and we have a similar remedy being considered by the committee or the board concurrently, that we are simply, we wait until the end of the remedy to determine whether or not we're going to proceed, not speaking in specifics, but hasn't that always been the practice, Mr. McDonald, if he's still with us?
Mr. McDonald. Or Ms. Charles.
Again, I don't want to get into too much in the way of specifics, but and that might be best not to be in open right now with something like that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We'll try again. Next item, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is new business. We have none. Following that, we have question period. I have no virtual applicants and there's nobody in the gallery. So then it would be a recommendation to go into closed under Community Charter Part 4, Division 3, Section 90, subsections I and K.
Okay, that's been moved. A seconder for that one. There we go. All in favor? Motion carries. Okay, thank you, everyone. We will see you in 10 minutes on a different
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Can somebody check